Hi everyone, I hope you had a great weekend. So today we're going to be reading chapter 3 of I Survived the Titanic. George didn't mean to get into trouble. It's just like he got those great ideas. Like on the first day at sea when he had climbed up the huge ladder onto the crow's nest. "Aunt Daisy," he yelled, waving his arms. She looked up and she'd almost fainted. And yesterday George had explored the entire ship. Aunt Daisy kept warning him that he'd get lost. She said the ship was like a maze, but George could always find his way. Even in the huge forest that stretched out behind their farm, Mom used to say that George had a map of the world behind his eyes. He saw the engine rooms and the boiler rooms and wound up on the third-class recreation deck. He was watching some boys play marbles when he noticed that he wasn't alone. A little boy staring up at him with huge eyes the color of amber glass. "See?" the boy said, "see?" And he held out a postcard of the Statue of Liberty. He looked so proud, like he'd carved that big lady himself. George felt like he had to show him something in return, so he took out his good luck charm, the bow knife that Papa had given him for his 9th birthday. He let the little boy run his fingers across the handle, which was carved from an elk's antler. "Enzo," the little boy said, puffing out his chest and pointing to him. "George," said George. "Giorgio," cried the little boy with a smile. A man sitting next to them laughed. He was reading an Italian-English dictionary and had the same huge eyes as the boy. George guessed right that he was Enzo's father. "Marco," he said, shaking George's hand, "you are our first American friend." Marco must have been studying that dictionary pretty hard because George understood everything that he said. George Enzo was 4 years old. He'd lost his mama too. He and Marco come from a little town in Italy, and now they were moving to New York City. George told Marco about their farm and their trip and explained that any decent person living in New York had to be a Giants fan. For some reason, Marco thought that was funny. When it was time for George to leave, Enzo got very upset. Very, very upset. "Giorgio," he howled, loud enough for the entire ship to hear. People started to put hands on their ears. Marco promised that they'd see George again, but Enzo wouldn't quit howling. George never heard anything so loud. By the time Enzo let go of George's leg and ran back up the suite, Aunt Daisy was practically howling too. "I thought you fell overboard," she cried. But even then she wasn't really mad. She didn't get really mad until last night. How that lady screamed when George came sliding down that banister like he really was a giant squid. George didn't mind getting yelled at. He was used to it. Not a day at school went by without Miss Landers shouting, "George, settle down!" And Papa, well, he always seemed to be mad at George. But not Aunt Daisy. And being on this trip was supposed to make her happy for the first time since her husband died last year. It had been Uncle Cliff's dream to be on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. He'd struck it rich selling automobiles and had plenty of money to pay for one of the biggest suites on the ship. When Uncle Cliff had his accident, George was sure that Aunt Daisy would cancel the trip. Instead, she'd invited George and Phoebe to go with her. And to George's shock, Papa said they could. "Your aunt's going on this trip to find a little bit of peace," he said to George. "I expect that you'd be a perfect gentleman." And if he wasn't, George knew that he'd be shipped off to that army school for sure. Papa had been talking about that place since George had brought the 2-foot rat snake to school to show Mr. Landers, because they were studying reptiles. George had been perfect the whole time in England. Aunt Daisy dragged him to a fancy clothes store for a pair of boots. He even learned to drink tea without spitting it back into the cup. But well, the Titanic. The ship gave him so many great ideas. But now, he'd really be perfect. No more ideas for the rest of the voyage. And that's the end of chapter 3. And answer the attached questions in your assignments, and tomorrow we'll read chapter 4. Have a great day, guys.